Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back, fellow public administration scholars, to our latest explainer. Today, we're unpacking Sung-hee Park's incredible analysis of the recent 2024 South Korean constitutional crisis. You know, for those of us in the field, this case is just an absolute goldmine. It literally forces us to rethink everything we know about bureaucratic loyalty and administrative responsibility in a modern democracy. It's a real game changer. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the empirical facts of the 2024 crisis, look at the limits of bureaucratic obedience, revisit the classic Friedrich and Feiner debate, unpack bounded administrative accountability, and then wrap up with distributed democratic resilience. All right, Section 1, the 2024 constitutional crisis. This is the high-stakes, real-world crucible that completely stress-tested the South Korean administrative state. Just look at how incredibly fast this moved. On the night of December 3, 2024, President Yoon Suk-yeol abruptly declares emergency martial law. But just hours later, citizens are mobilizing and the National Assembly formally revokes the decree. Fast forward 4 months and the Constitutional Court unanimously removes him from office. Now, the executive overreach obviously made global headlines. But for us, the real story is what was happening deep inside the machinery of the state during those chaotic hours. You had civil servants, military officers, legislative staff, all suddenly caught in this incredibly dangerous intersection of strict hierarchy, regality, and their duty to the public. And the normative stakes here became crystal clear almost instantly. Faced with this martial law decree, chunks of the administrative apparatus actually pushed back. They deliberately delayed or straight up refused unlawful directives. They essentially kept constitutional institutions breathing under immense pressure. And man, doesn't that just beg the ultimate public administration question? When a superior's orders clearly violate the Constitution, who exactly do public officials owe their loyalty to? Which brings us to Section 2, the limits of bureaucratic obedience and the deep institutional cracks this whole crisis exposed. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this number right here, 76. For 76 years, all the way back to 1949, South Korea's State Public Officials Act had this ironclad clause demanding public officials obey their superiors. Sure, stemming from post-colonial and authoritarian days, this clause created a highly efficient top-down bureaucracy. But, as Park rightly points out, it basically suffocated the institutional space for ethical dissent. It essentially gave civil servants legal cover for complete passivity. You know, after the previous presidential impeachments, scholars had already been warning about this creeping soullessness in the civil service, this habit of just executing orders without a second thought about legality or ethics. Because when a government normalizes unthinking compliance, blind obedience is suddenly framed as a virtue. It becomes totally detached from legality, which, as we just saw, is absolutely terrifying for democratic survival. It's honestly a perfect modern echo of administrative evil and Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. As public admin folks, we know this dichotomy like the back of our hands, right? The gap between simply doing things right, which is just pure technical execution, and doing the right thing, which demands true ethical governance. A democracy's survival quite literally depends on officials knowing the difference between lawful compliance and blind obedience. This isn't just some abstract academic theory anymore. The South Korean crisis proved it is a hard operational reality. This naturally pushes us right into Section 3, revisiting the foundational Friedrich and Feiner debate through a totally modern lens. And this brilliantly illustrates that classic, enduring tension we all debated in grad school. On one side, we've got Carl Friedrich in 1940, arguing that an administrator's internalized professional judgment, guided by technical expertise and the public interest, is a crucial democratic asset. But then that clashes head-on with Hermann Feiner's 1941 stance, insisting on strict external control by elected reps to make sure the bureaucracy is actually executing the public will. But here's the reality check. Modern democracies simply cannot survive on either extreme. If you lean entirely into detached professional judgment, you risk building this insulated elite technocracy that totally bypasses the public. But on the flip side, relying on unconditional external control, that just invites aggressive politicization. It guts professional competence and directly incentivizes the exact kind of blind compliance to illegal orders we're talking about here. A modern administrative state has to somehow thread this needle. So, how do we thread it? That takes us to Section 4. And Sung-hee Park's major conceptual contribution here, bounded administrative accountability. Let's define this clearly.
Bounded administrative accountability is a model where, yes, hierarchical deference is absolutely still the default, but, and this is a massive but, it is explicitly limited by constitutional obligations. Now, to be clear, this doesn't throw hierarchy out the window. We all know governments need hierarchy to function. Instead, it constitutionalizes it. It creates a strict, bounded framework where loyalty to the boss must operate within legal limits, rather than devolving into unconditional subservience.
Let's move to and see how this builds on comparative administrative law, which actually gives us a fantastic working example. Park points us to the German civil service model. Over there, they retain that hierarchical duty to follow orders, but it's legally bounded by a special duty of loyalty to the Constitution. This actually makes it a legal obligation for civil servants to speak up and object if a superior's order seems unlawful. It's literally a formalized institutional safeguard against executive overreach. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5. Distributed democratic resilience. How does this specific crisis in Seoul ripple out to the wider challenges facing administrative states globally?
Well, to make this work, it's not nearly enough to just cross an obedience clause out of a rulebook. The state has to build real systemic safeguards. We're talking ironclad legal protections for dissent, mandatory training in constitutional reasoning for career folks, robust whistleblower protections, and cultivating deep cultural norms of professional independence. Ultimately, a democratic civil service must be fully capable of serving the government of the day without ever becoming a captive hostage to it.
So the crucial point is this. A bureaucrat's professional judgment is not a threat to democracy. It is literally one of its most vital safeguards. And man, does this have profound relevance globally right now. Just think about the ongoing debates in the US over expanding at-will employment for civil servants. That kind of move threatens to trap career officials right between their professional integrity and their basic livelihood. Or look at the administrative legacies of militarization across the Asia-Pacific. In every single one of these contexts, bureaucratic integrity is exactly the firebreak that prevents illegal directives from inflicting irreparable damage. But hey, we have to remember institutions don't operate in a vacuum, right? The public space has to function as a modern agora. The South Korean crisis wasn't resolved by bureaucratic delay alone. It was resolved because everyday citizens mobilized immediately on the night of December 3rd. Institutional safeguards inside the bureaucracy and collective action outside from civil society are completely mutually reinforcing. To hold the line, the administrative state absolutely relies on the political legitimacy that only an engaged public can provide. So, we'll wrap up with this really powerful, overarching question. Based on Park's incredibly timely analysis, how should democratic states thoughtfully structure bureaucratic loyalty for those inevitable moments when political authority oversteps its constitutional bounds? Because this case challenges all of us to rethink the administrative state. We can't just keep optimizing it for efficiency. We have to design it for democratic resilience. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks some great new directions for your own research and seminars.